Have you ever observed, in those moments of sudden clarity, how dependency silently corrodes you? It's that instant when you perceive, with an almost painful lucidity, that each connection, each approval you seek, each hand you cling to, becomes an invisible shackle. You don't notice it at first. Schopenhauer understood this when he stated that solitude offers the intellectually gifted man the double advantage of being with himself and not being with others. But you remain there, surrendering fragments of your sovereignty, convinced that you need others to be complete, without perceiving that with each concession, with each external validation you pursue, you move one step further away from your own greatness. The uncomfortable truth is that all dependency is a form of slavery, even when wrapped in the shiny paper of affection or acceptance. Self-sufficiency is not, as many believe, the selfish art of not needing anyone. It is the conscious practice of being enough for yourself before turning outward. Observe those you call great. They are not those who cultivate the most connections, but those who have learned to stand on their own foundations when everything else collapses. While you desperately seek not to be alone, they have understood that true companionship begins with oneself. Man never feels more alone than when he is in a crowd, wrote Schopenhauer, and that paradox reveals the trap into which you have fallen. You surround yourself with people, voices, noise, but existential loneliness remains because you have not learned to inhabit yourself. Greatness begins precisely there, at that point when you stop fleeing from your own company. That restlessness you feel when you're alone is not an indication that you need more connections. It's the sign that you haven't developed enough intimacy with yourself. You've misinterpreted it all your life, interpreting it as a void that others must fill, when in reality, it is the space where your true essence waits to be discovered. Don't you find it revealing that your moments of greatest mental clarity, of deepest inspiration, have emerged in solitude? Schopenhauer was not mistaken in warning that solitude is the fate of all exceptional spirits, not because they are condemned to isolation, but because they have discovered that in self-imposed silence, capacities that social noise keeps dormant flourish. Emotional dependency is the silent poison that has paralyzed your potential. Observe how you modify your opinions to fit in, how you subordinate your decisions to others' criteria, how you have become the administrator of external expectations while your own ambitions wither in some forgotten corner of your being. The opinion of others is a weak motivation that cannot match that which arises from within, maintained the philosopher. And yet, you have built an entire life based on the approval of those who, ironically, are as lost as you are. Greatness has never emerged from this type of subordination. It has always been the fruit of a mind that dares to think for itself, even, especially, when that means being alone. You have confused connection with fusion, love with need. True human connection is only possible between complete individuals, not between fragments desperately seeking to complete themselves. That's why your most intense relationships end up devouring you, because you don't enter them as a whole being, but as a collection of deficiencies. Schopenhauer expressed it with brutal clarity. Marrying means reducing your rights by half and doubling your obligations. And although he was referring to marriage, this logic extends to all forms of bonds in which you abdicate your sovereignty. The paradox you have yet to resolve is that only those who can be completely alone are capable of loving without destroying themselves or the other. Self-sufficiency is not the enemy of true love, it is its prerequisite. Have you noticed how the pleasures of others are inaccessible to you? How you cannot even fully feel the joy or pain of those you love most? This insurmountable barrier is not a limitation. It is evidence of a truth that Schopenhauer deeply understood, that each human being inhabits an experiential universe to which no one else has full access. Each individual is in reality the complete subject of knowledge, and what he knows, therefore, is the entire world, he affirmed. This existential solipsism that you so fear is, in reality, the door to your freedom. By accepting that there are non-transferable dimensions of human experience, you stop seeking validation of your existence in others and begin to build from your center. Contemporary culture, with its obsession with hyperconnectivity, has turned self-sufficiency into a taboo. Look closely. Romantic dependency is glorified. Voluntary solitude is pathologized. Autonomous thinking is ridiculed when it contradicts the herd. But remember that Schopenhauer warned, "The herd is always more numerous than the shepherds." The social pressure to keep you in a state of perpetual dependency is not accidental. An autonomous mind is unpredictable, ungovernable, revolutionary. Power structures, from personal relationships to political systems, are sustained precisely by your fear of sufficing for yourself. They have convinced you that you need intermediaries to access your own happiness, and you have believed it. The suffering you experience in the face of rejection, criticism, or abandonment reveals how much power you have ceded. If a word can devastate you, if an absence can plunge you into despair, it is because you have externalized the sources of your value. Suffering is exceedingly positive, wrote Schopenhauer, and he was not wrong. That pain is the precise indicator of where you have placed your center of gravity outside yourself. Greatness begins when you recover that center, when you understand that no external opinion, no presence or absence can define who you are. This is not a painless process. On the contrary, it requires crossing the desert of confronting oneself without masks or distractions. The solitude you try so hard to avoid is the crucible where your authentic self is forged. Each time you fill your life with noise to flee from it, you sabotage your own development. A high intelligence tends to make its possessor a solitary, observed Schopenhauer, not because genius disdains humanity, but because it understands that certain transformations only occur in silence. Look at yourself. You constantly seek stimuli, connections, validations, while your potential waits in those empty spaces that so terrify you. Greatness is not compatible with the fear of one's own company. It demands that intimacy with yourself that only well-inhabited solitude can provide. How many times have you allowed majority opinion to silence your inner voice? The paradox is cruel. You seek acceptance by sacrificing precisely what makes you unique. Schopenhauer understood this when he stated that the opinion of thousands of people lacks value for one who knows how to think. True self-sufficiency begins with intellectual autonomy, with the ability to sustain your own conclusions even when everyone rejects them. Don't confuse this with arrogance. The self-sufficient mind does not disdain other perspectives. It simply doesn't need them to validate its own. It is that rare ability to stand alone in the midst of the storm of opinions and think, "I could be wrong, but this error, if it is one, is genuinely mine." Isolation as refuge reveals weakness. Isolation as a deliberate tool engenders power. Therein lies the subtle difference you have overlooked. It's not about hiding from the world due to inability to face it, but about strategically withdrawing to cultivate what social noise dilutes. Ordinary people merely think about how they will spend their time. A person with talent is concerned with how they will use it, Schopenhauer noted. Observe the truly great. They all developed the ability to isolate themselves, not out of misanthropy, but because they understood that constant connection dilutes creative power. Greatness requires those periods of incubation where ideas mature without contamination from consensus. Your deepest fear, the one you don't even dare to name, is discovering that when you remove all layers of external validation, nothing substantial remains underneath. It is the existential panic of facing the void you have avoided all your life. But precisely there, in that apparent abyss, is where Schopenhauer located true human freedom. Man can do what he wants, but he cannot want what he wants. Self-sufficiency allows you at least to recognize which part of your desires belongs to you and which is merely a reflection of others' expectations. It's no small thing. It's the first step toward personal sovereignty, without which greatness is impossible. The self-love so much talked about these days has nothing to do with complacency or self-indulgence. True love for oneself is demanding, sometimes even severe. Schopenhauer knew this when he stated that solitude teaches us what we should be. It's that relentless mirror that doesn't allow you to hide from your own contradictions, your limitations, your mediocrity. Therein lies its value. While the world may lie to you out of compassion or indifference, solitude confronts you with the naked truth. And it is only from that brutal honesty with yourself that you can aspire to something greater. Greatness has never emerged from self-deception, however comforting it may be. But self-sufficiency should not be confused with total isolation. The mistake many make, and that Schopenhauer himself made at certain moments, is believing that independence requires the absolute rejection of human bonds. It is not so. In solitude, the miserable feels miserable, the great spirit, rich, he wrote. What this means is that the quality of your solitude reflects the quality of your inner being. If your solitude devastates you, it's not solitude that's the problem, but the poverty of internal resources you have cultivated. True self-sufficiency doesn't make you antisocial. It allows you to relate from abundance rather than lack. It's the difference between approaching others to fill a void and doing so to share a fullness. The fear of others' judgment is perhaps the heaviest chain you drag. Observe how you adapt your behavior, your words, and even your thoughts to avoid disapproval. Change is the only constant, affirmed Schopenhauer, paraphrasing Heraclitus, but you have allowed that change to be dictated by forces external to you. Emotional self-sufficiency begins when you understand that, although others' judgment may have practical consequences, it does not have the power to define your intrinsic value. It is that capacity that allows you to remain whole even when the environment rejects you. The truly great in history were not those who never faced disapproval. They were those who endured it without disintegrating, because their validity did not depend on applause. Have you noticed how the people you most admire possess a kind of internal center of gravity that seems immovable? It's not about inflexibility, but about a core of convictions and values that remains constant despite changing circumstances. Schopenhauer expressed it this way: all truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. This observation reveals something crucial about self-sufficiency. It requires the ability to sustain your truths through these stages, especially when consensus is against you. Greatness implies that patience, that faith in your own perception that doesn't need immediate validation. Do you know that restlessness that invades you when you're too long without external stimuli? That impulse to check your phone, turn on the television, call someone? It's the symptom of a profound addiction to exteriority. Like all addictions, it reveals an inability, that of being present with yourself. Normally, we think that our value lies in what others think of us, noted Schopenhauer, and that dependence on the external gaze has turned you into a fugitive from your own interiority. Self-sufficiency begins with small acts of courage, daring to be in silence, to feel fully without distractions, to explore the unexplored territories of your mind without the crutch of social noise. Your obsession with efficiency has made you forget something fundamental: the fertility of apparent emptiness. Boredom is the feeling that everything is a waste of time. Serenity, the feeling that nothing is, the philosopher pointed out. And in that distinction, you find the key you have overlooked. The constantly busy, constantly stimulated mind loses the regenerative capacity of silence. Schopenhauer would be horrified by your culture of productivity porn, where every minute must be maximized, optimized, exploited. True intellectual productivity, the kind that leads to greatness, requires those periods of apparent inactivity where the deepest connections occur below the threshold of consciousness. The price you pay for your dependency is higher than you imagine. It's not just about lost freedom, but sacrificed authenticity. Each time you mold your being to fit in, to please, to not disturb, you are betraying something essential. Schopenhauer was relentless in this regard. Fate shuffles the cards, but we play them. That responsibility terrifies you because it implies accepting the consequences of your choices without the consolation of blaming others. Self-sufficiency demands that moral maturity, the ability to recognize that, although you don't control all circumstances, you do decide how to respond to them. And it is precisely in that space, that of your responses, where greatness manifests or is frustrated. Modern technology, with its promises of hyperconnectivity, has exacerbated your atavistic fear of solitude. It offers you the mirage of always being accompanied, always validated, always relevant. But as Schopenhauer would observe, sufferings increase in proportion to consciousness. The more you depend on these external validations, the more vulnerable you become to their absence. The smartphone you compulsively check is not a tool. It's a symptom of your inability to inhabit your own company. Self-sufficiency in the digital age is not about permanently disconnecting, but about maintaining the ability to do so without your internal balance collapsing. Compassion, that value Schopenhauer placed at the center of his ethics, should not be confused with codependency. Compassion is the basis of all morality, he wrote, but understood as the ability to recognize others' suffering without merging with it. Observe how you have distorted this concept. You believe that being compassionate means carrying others' emotional weight, solving their problems, sacrificing your boundaries. Nothing could be further from true compassion, which requires enough inner solidity to accompany without dissolving. Emotional self-sufficiency doesn't make you insensitive. On the contrary, it allows for clearer empathy, not contaminated by your own deficiencies and projected needs. Each time you felt that strange mixture of admiration and resentment towards someone who seems not to need the approval you so desperately seek, you've glimpsed the essence of self-sufficiency. It's not about cold indifference, but about an internal center of gravity so solid that external fluctuations barely disturb it. Life oscillates like a pendulum, back and forth, from suffering to boredom, observed Schopenhauer. The self-sufficient person doesn't escape this human condition, but maintains a certain equanimity in the face of these oscillations, because their value doesn't depend on volatile external factors. Greatness is not in not feeling the storms, but in not being uprooted by them. Your resistance to self-sufficiency disguises itself as altruism, as a need for connection, as shared humanity. But if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize that beneath those noble justifications hides a much more basic fear, the fear of discovering who you are when no one is looking. Schopenhauer intuited this. Each person is as happy as he believes himself to be. This uncomfortable truth confronts you with your inescapable responsibility. If you have externalized the sources of your happiness, you have also surrendered control over it. Emotional self-sufficiency begins with that act of sovereignty, reclaiming authority over your own well-being, assuming that, although you cannot control circumstances, you always retain the power to interpret them. The true test of your self-sufficiency is not in moments of success, but in those of failure. Who are you when everything external collapses? When approval turns to criticism, abundance to scarcity, company to solitude? Schopenhauer noted that money is like seawater. The more one drinks, the thirstier one becomes. And the same applies to all forms of external validation. It is never enough because it doesn't satisfy the fundamental need it claims to address. Emotional self-sufficiency frees you from that insatiable thirst by recognizing that what you really need cannot come from outside. Greatness arises precisely from that ability to stand on your own feet when all external support disappears. You have turned others' opinions into the most effective prison ever designed, one whose bars you cannot see but constantly feel. The weight of social, family, and cultural expectations crushes you without your being able to clearly identify the source of that pressure. As Schopenhauer pointed out, few people think, but all want to have opinions. And you have allowed those opinions, many coming from people who haven't even examined their own lives, to determine the course of yours. Self-sufficiency is not the absence of external influences, that would be impossible, but the ability to filter them consciously, to distinguish which ones resonate with your deepest essence and which are merely noise. In the end, the question is not whether you can live without others. Schopenhauer, despite his social pessimism, recognized the inherently relational nature of the human being, but whether you can live with yourself. If, by eliminating all distractions, all external validations, all roles you play, you find something substantial in what remains. The greatest of goods is wisdom, and this is acquired through self-knowledge, he affirmed. Self-sufficiency is precisely that journey inward, not to separate yourself from the world, but to relate to it from a place of integrity rather than need. Greatness is not the final destination of this journey. It is its natural consequence when you dare to travel it to the end, without shortcuts, without self-deception. What you fear most is not rejection or failure. It is the possibility that, by stripping away all the external validations you have accumulated as shields, you will discover a void where you expected to find your essence. But Schopenhauer would tell you that this fear of emptiness is precisely what keeps you bound. Man is the only animal that can get bored, he wrote, pointing to that peculiar human condition of horror at existential emptiness. Self-sufficiency requires making peace with that apparent void, understanding that it is not an abyss of non-being, but the space where your authentic self can finally manifest, free from the constructions and projections that have kept it captive. Greatness arises when you learn to inhabit that space without compulsively filling it with noise. The cruelest paradox is that in pursuing approval, you have become increasingly less deserving of it. The authenticity you sacrificed to be accepted was precisely what made you valuable. The first rule, perhaps the only one, of all good style is to have something to say, Schopenhauer noted, and this applies not only to the art of writing, but to the art of living. What do you really have to offer when you have diluted your singularity trying to fit in? Emotional self-sufficiency returns that lost originality to you, the ability to stand on your own experience, to speak with your own voice, to defend your own perceptions. It is no coincidence that those who transform the world are precisely those who dared to dissent, to see what no one else saw, to defend what was not yet defensible. Well-understood solitude is the laboratory where self-sufficiency is forged, not as a permanent state, but as a regular practice, a sacred space where you can listen to yourself without the interference of social noise. An essential part of happiness consists in tranquility and peace of mind, the philosopher noted, and that inner peace is impossible if you depend on the constant bombardment of external validations. Observe how you react to the prospect of being alone with yourself, the anxiety that invades you, the thousand pretexts you fabricate, the technology you resort to in order to avoid it. That resistance is the precise indicator of how much you need exactly what you avoid. Greatness demands that ability to strategically withdraw from the world, to return to it with renewed clarity. You have not yet understood that genuine independence is the prerequisite for healthy interdependence. Schopenhauer observed that solitude offers the intellectually superior man two advantages: to be with himself and not to be with others. And in that apparent misanthropy hides a profound truth. Only one who can be completely alone can truly be with others, without vampirizing their energy, without projecting their deficiencies, without turning them into instruments for their own validation. Emotional self-sufficiency doesn't distance you from others. It allows you to approach them from a place of freedom rather than need. Haven't you noticed that the most toxic relationships are precisely those in which both parties need each other to feel complete? There is a crucial difference between self-sufficiency and arrogance, although superficially they may seem similar. Arrogance arises from fear, disguised as superiority. Self-sufficiency from the serenity that comes from knowing oneself. Talent reaches goals that no one else can reach. Genius reaches goals that no one else can see, wrote Schopenhauer. The truly self-sufficient person doesn't need to proclaim their independence. They simply live it, without boasting, without contempt for those who have not yet found their center. Greatness has never manifested in the need to demonstrate superiority, but in that rare ability to remain faithful to one's own vision, even when no one else understands it. Time is perhaps the resource where your lack of self-sufficiency is most clearly manifested. Observe how you distribute it, much dedicated to activities that don't nourish you, but keep you connected, validated, distracted. Schopenhauer warned, "Men employ their reason much less in preventing misfortunes than in inventing consolations after they have arrived." And you, instead of cultivating the fertile solitude that could lead you to greatness, dedicate that time to avoiding the encounter with yourself. Self-sufficiency begins with that seemingly simple but profoundly revolutionary act, reclaiming your time, protecting spaces of solitude, not as an occasional luxury, but as a vital practice, as necessary as the air you breathe. Your resistance to self-sufficiency also manifests in your inability to sustain silence. The constant noise, physical and metaphorical, in which you live submerged is not accidental. It's a shield against self-discovery. Schopenhauer understood this when he stated that noise is the most impertinent of all interruptions, for it not only interrupts our thoughts, but disperses them. The dependent mind cannot bear silence, because in it emerge all the truths it has been avoiding. Self-sufficiency requires developing that capacity, almost lost in these times, that of existing in stillness, without the constant external reinforcements, without the perpetual validation that keeps existential anxiety at bay. Finally, understand that self-sufficiency is not a destination, but a path. It's not about achieving a perfect state of independence. That would be as illusory as total dependence, but about consciously moving in that direction. As Schopenhauer noted, life is a pendulum that oscillates between pain and boredom. Self-sufficiency doesn't exempt you from this human condition, but it allows you to inhabit it with greater dignity, with greater autonomy. Don't expect this journey to be comfortable. All genuine growth implies some degree of destruction. You will have to dismantle familiar internal structures, abandon emotional crutches you thought indispensable, face truths about yourself that you have avoided all your life. But in that painful process, you will find what you have always sought outside, the key to your own greatness.